Welcome to the FML podcast, the podcast on a mission to uncover actionable insights, explore the latest trends, and to catalyze your fintech's growth. Join Growth Gorilla's founder and managing director, Shameer Sachdev, and some of fintech's hardest hitting marketers and leaders.
Welcome everyone to today's episode of the FML podcast. Today we're joined by John Hills, Head of B2B Marketing at Crowdcube. John, thanks for joining us today.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me on, Shameer.
Amazing. As I kind of always start at the very beginning, why don't you tell us a little bit about your journey so far and a little bit about yourself?
Absolutely. So I have what you might call a bit of a varied background, done a bit of everything, which I think makes it more interesting. Started out studying literature at uni, loved reading, loved big ideas, stuff like that. Was a teacher in Latin America for a couple of years, then got a sales job back in the UK. Realized, although that taught me a lot, wasn't necessarily my calling, so moved over to marketing. I started out with early stage startups. One of those got acquired, which was lovely. One of those died, which, although tough at the time, taught me a lot about the world and how things work. Then, for personal reasons, moved to Toronto and started working for Crowdfunding, which is Canada's largest equity crowdfunding platform. And again, for personal reasons, around about 10 months ago, it was time to move back to the UK and was lucky enough to get a job at Crowdcube. Fast forward, here we are right now chatting. So that's a little potted history. I guess on the side, also helped run a seed accelerator, always been interested in VCs, ideas, entrepreneurship, ran my own agency for a little bit, and cold emailed my way into a job at Business Insider, doing a bit of freelance reporting. That was fun. Ended up doing an ad hoc interview with Gary Vee at a rooftop hotel, which was a little bit surreal but cool. And that's me in a nutshell, I guess.
I'm going to ask about that Gary Vee. How did that come about?
So it's a bit of a random one, to be honest. Back in the days of white hat, black hat, zebra SEO, I was very focused on content. Worked for a company that did invoicing software, nominally quite boring, but the marketing side was really fun. And one of the ways that we would do user acquisition is no one searches for invoicing software, but they do search for invoicing templates because they don't know that software exists. So a good thing you can do is create killer templates in Word, Google Docs, PDF, you name it. Get those to rank really well on Google. And then you kind of nudge the users through using a template to creating an account. So we're very focused on link building, kind of tit for tat, quid pro quo, content exchange. I'm quite good at outreach from the sales background, taught me how to do that quite well. So I used to pitch a lot of press, one of which was Business Insider. Managed to get hold of the right editor, I think right place, right time, pitched them the idea. The article did really well. I thought this is quite fun, shoot my shot. By the way, are you looking for freelance contributors? They said yes, kind of did that on a paid by paid basis. And from there, the articles went well, got more readers, and then kind of people would reach out to me with, would you like to interview X, Y, or Z? Got to know quite a few PR agencies. One of them had Gary Vee in town and invited me along. Fantastic day. Was a little bit of an odd moment or surreal, but yeah, it was super fun.
I had my moments with Gary Vee. There's some bits of his content that I absolutely love, but I find it gets a little bit intense sometimes.
Yeah, I have to say that I feel it's a bit like a cult. I mean, I know who he is. Big respect for what he's done. It's not necessarily my style, but if you speak out against Gary, his tribe will come after you. You know, in the comments on like Instagram or LinkedIn, which is great that there's that loyalty. But yeah, it's perhaps not my style, to be honest.
Yeah, his following is a bit like probably the Beyonce's following or the current who's the man at the moment, Andrew Tate.
Yes.
You speak out against any of that. Oh yeah, I mean we could have a whole podcast just talking about him, but we won't. You talk out against him.
He has good memes.
Yes, he does. But I mean, some of his approach has always been really really solid. It's been that I mean we're kind of talking about this sort of before we started recording, which was that that building a brand, and then obviously he runs his VaynerMedia, but he puts himself first, and so you become familiar with him, and then eventually you trickle down to his agency. You mentioned that you ran your own agency, or you started up an agency kind of prior to Crowdcube. But what area was that specializing in?
It was mainly working with companies who had quite a tech or a deep tech focus. created a brilliant product, got some initial traction, raised, let's say, anything up to a Series A funding, and then thought, we need to scale quite quickly and quite fast. We don't have in-house marketing. We don't necessarily want to hire a marketer or build out that function, but we could do with kind of a fractal marketer or like a fractal kind of CMO type play. So bring someone in on a retainer. Can you give us the direction? A lot of, I think any business, but particularly marketing is, do you know a good video agency? So rather than going out and, Googling that is quite overwhelming. If someone has a connection to, I've worked with these people before, good price to do a great video, ditto content, ditto PPC or whatever else it is. And so kind of using that. And then obviously you start small. I mean, you know this from the agency world, of course, but you start with one, that goes well, you get a referral to another one. But then again, doing it on the side is quite a commitment. I did it for a while, but you basically don't have a weekend. And it is nice to do your hobbies too.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Well, as you kind of mentioned, like running an agency is intense on the best of days. Obviously, you were at FrontFunder. What kind of attracted you to kind of like the crowdfunding space, the fintech space? What was kind of motivations behind that?
Well, I mean, I've always sort of loosely been in fintech. Even, the invoicing platform is about getting paid and kind of how help people process their payments. You bake in accounting into that as well. Coupled with that, as I said, with working with the Seed Accelerator and kind of the idea of entrepreneurship as a force for good. I've always admired people that have that conviction, that go kind of all in on an idea and how much it takes to work something and run something. With FrontFunder, I kind of moved to Canada. I was in a new country. I was working remotely at the time, which now is kind of par for the course, but this was pre-COVID. So it was quite unusual, if you want to put it that way. And the time difference working with a company back in Europe was a little bit tough for me. Became aware of the company and just, again, sort of right place, right time, knew what they did. They reached out looking for someone to run the marketing department. Sounded like a great opportunity, complemented what I'd already done, and the rest, as to say, is history. Was there for 2.5 years, learned a lot, really, really enjoyed it. And then, again, just great coincidence and timing for me that Crowdcube happened to need someone to head up their marketing at the time that I was moving back. Doubly nice because crowdfunding in Canada is around about 5 years behind where it is in the UK. So we always looked to Crowdcube as one of, kind of the big boys, like, how do they do it? What can we learn? And then I had to pinch myself a few times where I thought, oh my God, the stars are aligning here. This is kind of what I know in a company that I've always looked up to. I can learn a lot. This feels like I could contribute. Let's go. And kind of, that's how it all played out.
I've been following Crowdcube. I think we kind of worked it out. It was just over 10 years. And I've kind of seen them going from when Darren was doing talks, as I said, he was on stage with Jeff from Cedars and Simon from Bank of the Future. And it's not an easy concept to really get out there because it's a disruptive proposition. But then just to make it extra hard, it's also, a marketplace. There's two sides to it. I want to dig into that a little bit because we've had a lot of brands come on board, but we actually haven't had a marketplace on board before. So I kind of want to talk about that supply and demand. The first question that I get asked is, well, what do we do? Do we build supply first or do we build demand? I'd love to just get a bit of an overview of, the experts, Crowdcube, how have they done it and how, you guys have been doing it successfully for north of 10 years. So, a bit of a broad question, but let's dig into it.
Music to my ears. More than happy to nerd out about marketplace dynamics. Absolutely. Cool. I love it. I think you've hit the nail on the head there. You have this perennial chicken and egg question, kind of your supply want the demand before they're going to work with you and vice versa. The demand are going to look to the supply before they kind of create an account or start to work with you. I feel that best practice and experience dictates that you build up the supply and then you nurture the demand. So the way I think of that, an analogy, which I think we could all relate to is, for example, Uber. You need to get those drivers on the platform before people are going to hail the rides and then nurture it that way. Or an Airbnb is like you have to have the places that people can stay before they start booking them. And so when it comes to something like Crowdcube or any online marketplace, for us, the supply is getting companies on board, explaining to them why you should crowdfund, what the value of it is, myth busting, which, now we're 10 years in the UK. I think people are quite au fait with what it is and how it works. There's still some skepticism. There's still some naysayers. There always are, but we've kind of crossed the chasm. In Canada, for example, a bit earlier stage, and the team at FrontFunder do an amazing job of, educating the market and explaining to people. The classic one will come from a VC is, your cap table is going to look super messy. Actually, it doesn't. You've got a VTA, voter trust agreement. You tie it all together. Everyone is just one line on the cap table. Ditto in the UK, it's a nominee structure. But to go back to your original point about marketplaces, so what we do, we work to educate and get really the companies excited about what we do. They are actually our hook, the customer acquisition. So in a sense, the way that we get investors, our customer acquisition cost is zero because we're doing it through the companies. And that makes sense when you think about it, that if you go onto our platform right now, it's quite unlikely that you would just create an account. You wouldn't go to the trouble of creating an account unless you had the trigger to do it. So that's where the companies come in for us, where it's company X looks absolutely amazing. I want to be a part of that. The barrier to entry is really low, even if I just have £10, or I want to put a lot more in, a couple of clicks, I've become a co-owner. That's amazing. Where our demand side comes in, what we do is really nurture that. So the companies, we get them on the platform, we run a campaign, that provides a new pool of users to us. Then where we have to come in on the marketing side is, okay, what can we do to get them to do a second investment? What's going to encourage them? What's going to get them interested? You have the two types of investors predominantly, people that invest with the heart, people that invest with the mind, a combination of the two. We are quite scientific about that. So we split our investor base. I mean, we have over 1 million users, which is amazing, but we have a lot of data points to work with. So we split them down into different typologies. And the main one is what we call enthusiastic achievers. So those are people that, have a fair amount of disposable income. They believe in tech as a force for good. They probably work in some sort of related sphere. They invest fairly large amounts and fairly often. So we will have tailored behavioral emails thinking about, what makes the enthusiastic achiever user tick? How do we get them to invest? And it all feeds itself from there. The better the supply, the more activated and engaged the demand is, the more that feeds more supply. So you can go out to other companies and say, look, we have this community of really engaged investors, and then that feeds itself and reciprocates too.
You're acquiring your sort of investors via almost by the businesses that are kind of coming on board. Obviously, there was a period when I think Crowdcube were doing a lot of advertising on the tube, and I think up until recently, you still do that. Is that more for customer acquisition, as in like investors? Is that more for the businesses, or is it a halo effect for both? Where does that kind of sit in your sort of marketing stack, I suppose?
That is a fantastic question. I think the way to answer that is that broadly, high level, your marketing function exists to do two things. It's to boost your brand and it's to build out your pipeline. And so really, I would bracket that one more in the brand side of things. You want to be kind of more visible everywhere. You want to get people excited. It's often hard to quantify the value of brand impact, but you fundamentally believe in it as a business and you know that you want to be visible. People see those things, they absorb it as well. It's the same as the play that we do on LinkedIn. We know LinkedIn is the place to be. We've thought about our ICP. We know that they'll see us there, that the message will resonate with them as well. So we have, and again, we were chatting about this just a little bit before, I think, but we have our main profile, which we use. But we work very hard to activate and engage all of our employees as well. And one thing I've learned, and I think it makes sense when you think about it, but you can't strong arm people into posting on LinkedIn. They should do it because they want to. They're engaged and they'll do it in their own way. So for us, it's about saying like, this is how you can do it. These people are doing it really well. Do you want us to help and show you how you can do it? So be the enabler for our people. So going back to, kind of the tube ads and the LinkedIn is all part of the same thing. We want to create that buzz and excitement that we're kind of everywhere, getting people interested, and then kind of the things feed back to us from there.
Let's just talk about generally about the power of LinkedIn. Before we kind of click the record button, we were talking about how much of a great platform it is for B2B. And we know it kind of comes under some scrutiny. Twitter users seem to not like LinkedIn, and there's a bit of cringe on there. But by and large, it's a massively powerful tool. So when you're leveraging LinkedIn to kind of reach out to your target audience, which is, I'm assuming, founders of startups and scale-ups, are you relying purely, 100% on organic and kind of that team effort? Or do you kind of mix that in with a bit of paid? What's the sort of, and do you do sort of any direct, DM type stuff as well? I might be sort of digging into the secret sauce here a little bit, but...
Currently, we don't do paid, but that's not because we don't see value in it, but because we kind of explore things. We're quite strategic and intentional with how we do it. So rather than saying, let's do a bit of paid and see what sticks, the idea that we have is to split it into, the feed is quite a crowded space. We want to stand out. So what we would like to do with paid is basically kind of stand out a little bit, build up a retargeting audience that we then go after with kind of, some slightly more further down the funnel, specific things addressing their pain points. that's maybe one for, I think, a Q2 initiative, because we have enough to keep us busy on the organic side. Just as an aside, I've heard great things about people using conversational ads, which is quite a new one to me. I mean, I'm a little bit out of the PPC loop relative to what I used to do, but I've heard people get really great results on the B2B side with conversational ads. I think like everything, there's a saturation point where the first few people to do it, they really nail it. And from there, kind of people get exhausted. But for us, it's really a hugely organic play at the minute with LinkedIn. There's so much for us to go after. As I say, we use the main page as kind of like our anchor, and we build it out from there. I think the other thing to mention is obviously the bigger the company that we work with, the more complex the buying committee. So it's very much about understanding, look, we can go at this from various different angles. Do we, the marketers, do we make a kind of hit list of those big CMOs or the heads of marketing that we want to reach out to? Salespeople more on the commercial side. Our financial team, largely, I think, by the nature of what they do, are not as active on LinkedIn. So it's more kind of the purely commercial side. But what I would do is make a list of, for example, these are 10 CMOs that, I would love to engage with, and then potentially at some point work with them for Crowdcube, but not go with the hard sell. So I make the list, follow them on LinkedIn, as we were discussing before, be very intentional with having them in my feeds, comment on what they're saying. I do use a few too many emojis, but, kind of not just putting platitudes, but actually something interesting. And then it will come back to you, right, and build it up from there. So yeah, at the minute, it's very organic. And ditto the sales team. If someone's doing great stuff, they're on our radar, just kind of congratulate them on it, put some insightful comments. If they're featured on a list, go out for them as well. So there's plenty for us to go after there at the minute on the organic side.
Again, kind of going back on the nuances of LinkedIn, there's a crowd there that doesn't like to, or always sort of pushes back on people sending DMs and connecting and actually using it as a sales tool. But personally speaking, what else is it there for at the end of the day? There's only so many lunches I can in pictures of kids I can look at on Facebook and stuff on TikTok now. But yeah, LinkedIn is absolutely perfect for that.
Another interesting one I've seen, Shameer, and I've seen some people get great mileage out of it, is actually the cross-posting. One that stands out to me, I spend a fair amount of time on Reddit just because I think it's an amazing, again, if you curate it and use it well, it's a fantastic source of knowledge. You can see the B2B marketers that are active Reddit users based on the meme that appears on Reddit will appear on a feed a couple of days later in LinkedIn, which is great. But TikTok videos, I've seen people prove kind of naysayers wrong with create a TikTok video, cross-post it on LinkedIn. I mean, the guys at Lavender do it amazingly well. They're absolutely crushing it with kind of taking really fun, interesting content. They put it on TikTok, build it up, and then purpose it on LinkedIn. So I guess it's there's horses for courses too, right? Kind of, as we said, understanding your ICP, what makes them tick, and how do you get in front of them?
Yeah, huge part of it. I think that's kind of hitting the nail on the head, really. I kind of want to talk a little bit about the market landscape at the moment. We've had a bit of a downturn. There's debates on whether or not we are in a recession or are we entering a recession. I think whatever it is, there's been a slowdown in the marketplace. And that kind of happened from sort of mid-year last year. How has that impacted Crowdcube? I mean, I've got a personal opinion on it, but I kind of like to hear it from the horse's mouth and say, have you guys written that out? Has it been an issue? How have you found it?
I think like everyone, we are, of course, susceptible to macroeconomic dynamics, and we work with companies looking to raise money. And we really need to be very in tune and mindful of that, right? Like marketing 101, know your audience, know your buyers. It doesn't land with us to go out with a message, raise a lot of money, everything's great if people are kind of thinking about, keeping their powder dry and sort of looking over to the next 12 months. But what is fascinating and really interesting to see is on the retail investor side, 2022 did not dampen appetite at all, actually. Like if we look at our numbers, I mean, we had 246,000 new accounts created on the platform, which year on year was a 29% growth. And in terms of investors, we welcomed 100,000 new investors, which is up 25%. So that really kind of blew my mind in a sense that there's definitely a lot of doom and gloom in the market. But in terms of what we see on the retail investor activity side, and that goes back to that point where I was talking to you about typologies as well. I think that sometimes retail investors get labeled a bit unfairly as they're not, accredited or savvy, and they don't always know what they're doing. And, kind of it's a lot of people sort of just hitting and hoping. It's actually quite the opposite, I would say. It's just so interesting to see that part, but of course affected, but overall performance is strong. And we want to build and consolidate on that going into 2023 as well.
my perception is that actually it's a good opportunity for Crowdcube because, in a time where your audience, really, your target companies need funds, you're a conduit to that. And there seems to be, yes, cost of living has increased, but with the sort of upper end of the market, they still have, residual cash. So I suppose, Crowdcube is probably looking fairly strong for 2023.
Oh, yeah, massively. And then, diversification has probably landed as a message more than ever. Kind of most people don't put all of their eggs in one basket. But if you see the public side going in one direction or it's perhaps more volatile, the private market is inherently more illiquid, but that means it's less susceptible to kind of things that happen in the short term. But you're bang on there as well. Kind of part of our value prop is to help you raise money, help you grow. The company's founded on the idea that if you have a great concept, you've got traction, you've got a community that love what you want to do, nothing else should be limiting you in terms of how you raise money, be it your background, your profile, your capability, but also economic conditions. So we come in there as well. Exactly as you say, kind of we can help you raise that money and help you take it to the next level here and across Europe too.
Well, one point you mentioned was, retail investors not getting enough credit. And you also talked about obviously your sort of value proposition. So I think the stats are something along the lines of you've raised money for, I think, over 1,000 companies, about 1.5 billion that you've raised in total. How do you think, Crowdcube has reshaped the world of investing?
That's a great point. And when you look at, for example, specifically Fintech, how it's reshaped the world of investing is it's allowed Fintech companies to kind of cement and enhance the relationship that they have with their customers, because part of the value prop from a B2B side is that once you become a co-owner of a company, because you invest on the same terms as institutional finance, which is part of the beauty of it, you're in there for the ride, right? So we have kind of a lot of stats to prove that people who are a co-owner as well as a user, they're much more loyal, they churn less, they're going to be a brand ambassador and refer you everywhere. Particularly in the fintech space, they're going to be top of the list in terms of like beta users, testing stuff out, giving you value adds. I mean, a couple of stats that come to mind for me are one is GoHenry, so kind of the kids finance app. They have stats to show that their shareholders, so their retail investors that come in through the rounds, they spend 50% more than kind of what you might call regular customers. And they're providing about double the number of referrals. But the one that absolutely blows my mind is Chip, so the investing app. They have, from their co-owners, I think they are 400% more likely to refer people. And the one that is absolutely staggering is 500% less likely to churn. So the value prop in terms of how you've changed the investment landscape is kind of using crowdfunding, to just really nurture that relationship, also as a marketing exercise. But then you look at the numbers. I mean, we work with the likes of, across Europe, you've got Revolut in there, Free Trade, Pronto from France. Monzo have 36,000 retail investors on their from their rounds. Moneybox has close to 17,000. So changing things, it's opened things up for the better, I think. It's really enabled people to do a whole lot more.
Absolutely. I always see, there's so many benefits from a company's end. Obviously, you've got the customer loyalty bit, you've got brand awareness, great for targeting an audience that has disposable income and wants to invest. So I can understand why Chip is absolutely spot on. We've got a client of ours, I won't mention the name, but they're running a campaign in March. It'll be absolutely perfect for them. They'll benefit from obviously getting the investment, but also a tranche of users at the same time as well. Kind of one of the other areas that I kind of want to venture into is just start talking a little bit about the growth of Crowdcube. So kind of going way back when I said, when I first came across Crowdcube like 10 years ago, you guys have grown, massively. It feels like a lifetime ago, but you've done several crowdfunding raises yourself. You've had investment from, I think, Numis, Draper, Balderton, and a whole bunch more. Are you on the cusp of, or have you started rolling out across Europe?
So we've been in Europe around about a year now, officially. Of course, I think like for a lot of people, Brexit made things slightly more challenging for us. But yeah, we're the only platform to have that, or the first, I should say, to have kind of Europe-wide accreditation. So what that means is that a company can raise on Crowdcube in the UK and across Europe. So you access both pools of investors. Obviously, a lot of work, because they're regulated, goes into kind of getting that up and ready. But yeah, the company has always looked at that kind of horizon for growth. and is now operating across all of Europe. And so that's initially the kind of job I came in, was to help with that expansion. And, I think from a marketing perspective, when it comes to growing, the devil is really in the detail, if you know what I mean. Kind of small things. You have to sweat the small things, if you know what I mean. Like if you're marketing to French investors or to French companies, the way they think about those things is very different to how you do it. Even the term crowdfunding has a completely different meaning. Even if you translate it, into the language, it means something very different in different places. So, for example, in the Nordics, I have an office in Stockholm. Crowdfunding has existed, but it's dominated by smaller players. And so the way that it's typically seen is, one of the pushbacks you get is crowdfunding to companies that can't raise money anywhere else, or it's literally to keep the lights on, which is actually quite the opposite of what we do. So kind of when it comes to growing, and kind of one of the things, even the name, the term you use really matters. So digging deep into that one, I think, is really important. The other one, which I guess applies to stuff in general and particularly to marketing, is just, take as much feedback as you can get, the good, but also the ugly, and, kind of be really grateful when people give you feedback. Even if on the inside it hurts, it's what makes you better, right? So those are definitely things that we've been learning and kind of applying to make us better too.
Yeah, it's I know what you mean. I literally just done like end of year / beginning of year session with our board, and there was like, I do like highlights and lowlights, and like, highlights are great, but you've got to spend your time on the lowlights, and there's bits that hurt, and but you walk away a bit sore from it. But I think it puts you in a position of strength. So we've supported a few companies that have scaled across Europe, and we've kind of got like a checklist, we kind of call it, of areas that we focus on. I suppose what I'm interested in kind of understanding from your perspective or Crowdcube's perspective, was it a flat rollout across the whole of Europe, or did you sort of go in it, with one territory first, and then kind of what were the attributes that encouraged you to make that decision, basically?
We've had a physical presence in Spain for around about 7 or 8 years now. So we have an office there, and we've been running there for quite some time. So that's been there, and that's really allowed us to gain great learnings about the differences, but also to shape the international approach and, kind of sweat the small things, but also take it one step at a time. Because obviously when expanding or launching a product in general, you typically have that tension between the commercial and the product side. So, one is typically stronger or more ready than the other. And if you mess with that balance too much, you kind of only get one first impression to launch in a market. And if you go really hard on the commercial side, but the product isn't quite there, you're going to suffer, and vice versa. If you have an incredibly strong product, but no one using it, it's also difficult. So definitely a phased approach, starting out with Spain, then coming up into France and to Sweden as well, and kind of taking it step by step, being very open to the feedback and kind of testing with a few campaigns, seeing how that works and taking it from there, really. I mean, in terms of I guess to spin it around, like in terms of the checklist, is that how you approach it as well? Or have you got a different take on it?
It's not a million miles apart, actually. I've got to check. It sounds really sad. I've got to check this in front of me because I'm I'm giving a talk.
I should have asked that before I said mine, shouldn't I? And then been like, oh yeah, I've done all of that.
So if you're going to ask, I'll run through it really, really quickly. It's 8 points, and I'll kind of bullet point it. So first thing is money, budget. Do you have the budget to do it? Are you getting ahead of yourselves, or are you going to be spread too thinly? And therefore that determines the number of territories you want to launch into. What does the landscape look like? So what's the total addressable market, and is there a growth trend in that territory or country? So my view is always better to jump on a moving train than to kind of be stuck at the station. Prospective customers, how many are there? Do they need educating? And then we always talk about product market fit, right? I think the thing that people forget is you have the product, but the market might be different. So just because you've got product market fit in the UK, you may not have product market fit in, say, France. To your point, you were talking about Sweden and you were talking about France and the way they categorize it and how they view it. That's a difference in market, right? So you could launch in with the same messaging and it could fall flat on its face. Regulation is obviously another piece. Competitors, so number of competitors and really how entrenched they are. How does your target audience consume media? And then do you have a hub where you've got lots of customers at the moment? So, for example, we've got a client that is predominantly targeting Latin America. They want to make a reach over to Europe, but they've got actually quite a few clients through, in Spain, because obviously a lot of activity that they run, content, influencer, etc. is in Spanish. So they picked up a lot of Spanish clients inadvertently. So that kind of makes the next strategic move for them. And then, brand proposition and messaging. So how you position yourself. That's sorry, I kind of commandeered your.
No, I was nodding along, going, that all makes total sense to me. Yeah.
It's not a million miles away from kind of the angle that you took. Obviously, it's before your time, but do you know what the reasoning for launching into Spain was? Or if you don't, that's absolutely fine.
No, it's a little bit before my time, to be honest. I think, like all startups, you kind of iterate and test and look at hypotheses. I believe they were sort of testing into a couple of different markets and see what traction there was where. And Spain landed really well and, became an additional market for the company to work in. Again, based on kind of those checklist points that you listed off as well, but it made sense to continue there.
Europe's a big place. I have to remind all US clients and prospects of that, it's not just one country. Is there any plan to sort of spread further in Europe, or do you feel that you want to take a sort of stronger foothold in Europe first before you kind of consider that move outwards, if at all?
I think the latter. Well, exactly as you say, kind of Europe is on par population-wise with the US, but, in terms of like the number of countries and kind of the different things that fall into it, it's all very different. Even if you look at France and Spain, for example, or France and the UK, we are definitely going to focus on France, the Nordics and Spain for now because there's so much potential for what we do. I mentioned that Canada's maybe 5 years behind the UK in terms of crowdfunding maturity and market acceptance. We are a few years behind, obviously, in Europe relative to the UK because the UK is quite a pioneer of equity crowdfunding. So there is so much potential. That train is really only just speeding up. It's not even full yet. So there's a lot more people that we can bring along with us and take it along. So definitely our core focus for now are those three markets.
That's amazing when you think about it, right? Because it's not like by any means the UK is saturated at all with crowdfunding. And then you've only got sort of, 2 or 3 key players. We won't mention the names, obviously.
Good. There's only one main player, obviously.
Yeah, I know. Yes, there's only a couple of players. It's nowhere near saturated and it's still growing. So it just kind of makes you think the opportunity for Crowdcube as a business is, it's absolutely enormous when you think about it. You guys have been going for over a decade now. It could be another decade before you've even really fully conquered Europe, if you think about it. And that's no disservice to the speed or anything. It's just the sheer size of it and the maturity of the market.
No, and you know what, Shameer? One of the most enjoyable things about working somewhere like Crowdcube is the people that you get to meet. You would be amazed. We do kind of live meetups once a month now that COVID's over, where people, we'll do kind of a live pitch evening. So companies come along and that we have on the platform will pitch to our investors. And some of the ideas that people have is nothing you were really even aware of. But when they talk about it, the passion that they have, you're all in, you're absolutely captivated. And so as you say, like in a way, UK is a market of a certain size, but there's much more potential here. And then you put that into Europe and you think, gosh, there's so many ideas, so many things that people with a little bit more cash and coverage, they could really have game-changing ideas in so many industries that you weren't even necessarily aware of. It's quite amazing, really.
And actually, the other thing that kind of brings me on to is, we talked about territories and the possibilities there. The one thing that we haven't even talked about really is almost like product development to a certain extent. There's obviously opportunities for marketplaces. You've got platforms like Primary Bid, although not a direct competitor. They serve a niche, which is obviously listed firms looking for funding. What's kind of on Crowdcube's horizon there? Are there sort of any product developments or anything you can kind of share with us that would be of interest, do you think?
High level, we're really focusing on making the product work and really kind of localize it for each individual market. And as I said, kind of sweating the small things. The devil is often really in the detail on how that works and how you make it kind of feel very local for people and focusing on that core experience to make it fast, efficient and scalable. So I can't really go into the details or all the specifics of what that means, but we really want to double down on that core experience for those raises so that it's really pleasurable from the investor side, but also for the company too, right? Kind of because putting a pitch onto the platform is a lot of work and kind of getting yourself up and running. You give a lot of yourself, you give a lot of time. It's totally worth it, but it is quite kind of an intense experience. So really doubling down on making that core product amazing is what our focus is right now.
There's probably a point I can add to my checklist, which is localization, right?
Yeah.
It's such a huge part of launching into a territory that's obviously for us, where English isn't the first language, and there's so many facets to that. Obviously, there's the website itself, the platform, the email comms, the advertising itself, customer services, and all of those bits and pieces that kind of need to be thought of. I can absolutely understand why, there's more than 26 languages in Europe alone. So that's your kind of work cut out for you.
I do like that. I mean, it's also kind of a good mantra in general, isn't it? But like, you don't need more time, you need more focus. And I guess in that respect, that we are pan-European. We have our core focus markets, and we want to kind of make sure we're absolutely best in class, kind of surprising and delighting people with the experience. So I think you're right, kind of localization does take a hell of a lot of work in itself, but it's so worth it when you get it right too.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you can turn a fledgling market into another UK just simply by getting that right. There's quite a few training platforms that have done that quite well, actually. I think Alpari did that pretty well, and IG's done that well as well. There's one bit that I kind of wanted to, you kind of just mentioned it, which was, you said, putting together a pitch is a lot of work. And kind of just want to talk about that and kind of going back to the point I mentioned around, Crowdcube doing some advertising on the tube. I think, majority of people listening to this podcast would have seen, their ads, you guys promote a particular brand. Do you kind of have any tips or suggestions or guidance for firms that are A, looking to crowdfund on Crowdcube, and B, any sort of tips and suggestions for actually putting their pitch together and actually their marketing their raise as well?
Obviously, anyone looking to crowdfund should absolutely head straight to our website or drop me an email. But joking aside, obviously what we look for, and I think what's really key, or the key ingredients for success are, goes without saying, but kind of having a product market fit or something that people love, and you have an engaged community who really back what you do and believe in it. Definitely making sure you have enough time to put towards these sorts of things. I think from a founder's perspective, it's also a very personal experience, isn't it? I mean, I've never gone through it myself from the other side, but you can imagine that kind of laying out your life's work or your ideas there for people to kind of analyze and inspect is quite an intense thing. So it's, being ready from that perspective. And I think in terms of what makes a great pitch, ultimately, people buy people. You can buy a concept and you have an idea. I think it goes back to what I said about, heart and mind, and you need to win both round. If you think about kind of what larger institutional investors look at, yes, it's product, yes, it's traction, but it's also the team you have in place to execute those things, right? And then all of the good things that go into a classic marketing mix, kind of your distribution, how you're doing those things. You want to have regular updates with kind of proof points, interest, and almost think of it like any other marketing campaign that you would do for your business, and kind of slot into those best practices. And I think also just being genuine, right? Like you get a lot from kind of appealing to that human side of stuff, which you then reinforce and back up with the traction, which kind of appeals to the mind side of things too.
Great advice. I think we covered an awful lot. Let's break into our kind of quick fire round. What podcasts are you listening to at the moment, other than ours, obviously?
Yes, I am listening to Demand Gen University by Metadata, which in terms of B2B marketing, I think they are fantastic. They're very candid. They talk about things I find really relatable, and it's kind of bite-sized. Also, Against the Grain by Kieran Flanagan, so ex-VP of Marketing at HubSpot. I mean, just people do a lot of things which I see him talking about a long time ago, if you see what I mean. So it's kind of like, I look at that almost like a little bit of a window into the future of what trends I should be on top of.
Cool. I've got lots of views and opinions on Demand Gen, all positive ones, mind you.
Excellent.
Any B2B brand that's not doing that is just missing a trick.
Yeah.
Simple as that. Other than Crowdcube, what would you say your favorite fintech brand is, or favorite fintech app?
I'm going to go for a classic, which probably a lot of people say, which is also Crowdcube alumni, but I love what Monzo do. I think particularly where I see it in quite a stark contrast is if you, from purely a marketing perspective as well, you take like a typical or a traditional bank, and the way they do marketing, it's changing, but I feel like a lot of it is very product-led. Monzo has fundamentally understood their audience, which is, like a millennial in an urban setting, and they build it all around that. So it's kind of like, yeah, that's me. That's relatable. And that's kind of very much your awareness part. You're not even thinking about the demand capture at that point. That's the 95%. And then they will come to you when they're 5% ready to buy. So nothing but respect and admiration for how Monzo do things.
What's the best bit of life advice you've ever received?
the one I said earlier is great. You don't need more time. You need more focus and be intentional. So, kind of understand what you really want to do, how long it takes to do it, and kind of less is more. So, have 3 kind of goals that are, in your personal or professional life and just work towards them.
John, thank you very much for joining us today. It's been an absolute pleasure speaking to you.
Likewise. Thanks so much, Shameer, and really appreciate it.
The FML podcast is brought to you by Growth Gorilla. To find out how our marketing growth experts can boost your fintech's growth, head to growthgorilla.co.uk. And make sure to search for the FML podcast in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or anywhere else podcasts are found. Don't forget to click follow to ensure you don't miss any future episodes. On behalf of the team here at Growth Gorilla, thanks for listening.